Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time it is in your city. I'm your host, Sunny M, and you're listening to Come Out and Shout. So, today's episode, it's a lot to do with the word sex. Let's say it together, everybody. Sex. I know how stupid that sounds, but it's really not stupid if you're a South Asian person. When I mean that, it's like, if you're South Asian, you know, the word sex is like saying the fuck, or saying, bitch, a swear word, I guess you could say. South Asians don't think sex exists, or it should be something that doesn't exist in your life. And as ridiculous as that sounds, it's true. Your parents don't want to know you're having sex. It's just a known fact. South Asians, like South Asian parents, don't want to know, don't think, and don't feel like their child will have sex anytime soon. So let's all bring it together and say the word, guys. Sex. And if you're sexually active, good for you. So on a serious note, this episode is to talk about sex ed. I'm not a health teacher or anything. It's more to do with, coming together as a South Asian community and understanding that sex is completely fucking natural. We all do it. If you're gonna, deprive a child of candy, they're eventually gonna eat the goddamn candy. So don't tell your children not to have sex. I'm not saying, have them be forbidden from having sex or let them be sexually active, where they're impregnating people left, right, and center. But I'm just saying that, sex shouldn't be off the table when having a discussion with your child. Obviously, I'm not a parent yet, and I do plan to be one, but, when that time comes, I will definitely be having a conversation to my child about sex. Now, again, for all you guys that are South Asians, I'm sure you've encountered that you've never probably had a conversation maybe about sex, sexual activity, I don't know, anything to do with sex. The word vagina doesn't come about with your parents. I don't think they talk about penises. That's a very differential, that differentiates us from, normal, families that do talk about sex, where parents do bring up the conversation about, being sexually active. Again, South Asians do not talk about that. We don't talk about sex. We don't talk about, our boyfriends and girlfriends and what we've been doing behind closed knit doors. We just don't talk about we don't just talk about sex. When a scene comes up on the TV, we hide our eyes or stray away or pretend it's not even happening on the TV for a large part. This episode is talk about sex and how to think of it as not as a taboo or something that's forbidden. It should be a natural act. If we really go back thousands and thousands of years to obviously the Kama Sutra, it came about from, Indian culture, divine expressions of sexual behavior. I'm not a Kama Sutra expert, but, I think there's a legitimate understanding about what it is and whatever in terms of sex. So anyways, back to the serious notion of this conversation. So, the reason why I wanted to bring this up is that this is based on my experience and what I think is important. As a South Asian culture, I think it's really important going forward with our generation and generations going forward to talk to our kids about sex. And not to practice what our parents have done in the past and, hide it as a thing that doesn't get talked about, a thing or an action that we don't do till we get married. I think that's completely wrong in terms of getting someone prepared for example, losing their virginity for the first time. I think it shouldn't be scary, but, I feel like South Asian culture has dumbed it down to be a very scary thing. Like, if you do this, something's going to happen. Like, the worst that's going to happen is, if you're not having sex safely, then you're going to have, an STD or, get some sort of infection. Or if you're not practicing safe sex, there's a chance you'll get pregnant. There's just one of two things. I mean, there's also a large part, other things that are involved in it. But for the majority, realistically, it's kind of the two things that are going to happen. Obviously, that doesn't apply to LGBT communities in terms of getting pregnant. So, I mean, anyways, aside from that. Yeah, so I wanted to talk about sex, and let's just all together, like I said, say sex. 1, 2, 3, sex. Sex, 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 sex. Let's just get it out of our system, really. As a child, I never talked to my parents about sex. It never got brought up. And as a kid, I've always been hidden, was always told to cover my eyes during sex scenes and stuff. And I never had a conversation with my parents about, being sexually active. They thought I was never going to have sex, or, just not be a concern. I think a lot of South Asians just ignore the fact that their kids might, be sexually active in high school. They just don't want to think about it. They just don't want to think that's ever going to come to their minds. But let's be real, people. Y'all are sexually active. I'm sure you've been sexually active in high school or whatever time it was. But, we are, and that's just the case of it is. We're sexually active beings. We're humans. We want to have sex. So to be deprived of that is ridiculous in my sense. So as a kid, we never talked about sex. We never talked about sex education, being protective, not just about sex. The important things. We were so ingrained in thinking not having sex that we never talked about what would happen in a situation where you could be sexually assaulted, in a case where you might be molested. Those kind of conversations align with not talking about sex, because there is a connotation towards sex being a taboo, something that's forbidden. So if those things happen to you, you've essentially committed some sort of sin, or you've done something bad. This isn't part of Hindu religion. Having sex isn't a crime. It's not a sin. It's a natural thing. But people in South Asian cultures have created it to be something that is a sin and taboo, which is completely wrong. And that has manifested into people thinking that, sexual assault shouldn't be brought up. If it's happened to you, you shouldn't, you should feel wrong to even bring it up to your parents if that's happened to you, because essentially what's going to happen is they're going to point the finger at you and be like, well, it was your fault, and, this has happened because of you. And I think that's for a large part why a lot of girls don't bring it up for that happening to them, because that's what they're going to think. They're going to think that their parents are shaming them for that happening to them because they've caused that. And that kind of coincides with rape culture, essentially thinking it's the girl's fault for letting the guy essentially sexually assault her. Same to do with molestation. I think I touched on it on my last episode, my second episode, when I was a child and I was molested. I internalized it being my fault because my mom said, what did you do? What did you do? And so I internalized and thought it was my fault, so I never brought it up and talked about it with them. So there's this whole circle about, it's not just a small part of you not talking to your parents about sex or them not talking to you about sex. It really manifests into a larger issue about being safe and practicing safe sex. And I think that's an important conversation that everyone should have, and I think that circle should be broken in terms of making sure that we as South Asians going forward have those discussions with our kids, because it's vital and important. And it'll also maybe essentially, prevent rapes or any types of molestation or sexual assaults, because the offender will know that, she's not going to say anything because, she'll think she'll be shaming her parents, so I'm going to get away with it kind of thing. So it manifests in that sort of way, and I think it's really important, like I said, to bring up topics of sex and sexual behavior and just, normalizing it in the South Asian community, which is really vital. I think it also stems from South Asian parents kind of making you feel like you can't be in tune with your body. And what I mean that it's like, for example, in the way you sit. Like when I was a kid, I have a very casual way of sitting, so I sit with my legs open, and I was always told to keep my legs shut when sitting, because it's not respectful if people and guests are over, or even sitting in like a masculine manner. It's kind of like an expression. So we're always being told to not express ourselves physically, like I guess in our or gestures. And even though it might just be a small thing, grows into feeling, I guess, not shameful, but kind of wanting to hide your body and thinking of your body as something bad versus something that's beautiful, and hiding your body parts. So I myself am very self-conscious just because of the way I grew up, thinking of my body as something that shouldn't be shown. My parents, per se, aren't strict in that manner. Like, for the odd time, my dad would be like, say something if I was wearing very, very short shorts. But if I wore a tank top or I wore the two-piece bathing suit, there's nothing wrong with that, right? But I think flaunting your body is another part where South Asians don't, I guess, approve of. And I'm glad to see that a lot of South Asian people are actually, expressing their bodies. For a long time, you would never see somebody posting a picture of themselves, skin showing, because they felt like it'd be disrespectful to their parents. Obviously, their parents don't follow them on social media, but they'd know that someone else that's following them would eventually tell their parents. So, like I said, it comes to a whole full circle. I think that if we start having the discussions with our parents about stuff going forward, into our kids, we won't internalize it so much that we essentially feel ashamed of our bodies, and feel ashamed to want sex, to be sexually active, or to express our sexual being because it's natural. You can't really deprive somebody of wanting to be their sexual selves, like whether they want to express themselves sexually in dance, music, writing, whatever it is. It should be a topic that's talked about freely and not out of fear. I think there's a really big joke behind Bollywood movies, because for the longest time, you'd see, a couple in a Bollywood film coming close to each other, and their cheeks would graze to represent, I guess, them being, intimate. The most intimate they would get is just like fondling themselves in a hug motion, I guess you could say, or like, like I said, cheek grazing, nose grazing, lip grazing, but just not physically kissing each other. And just in the last 10 years, that's when it started, where they started, I guess, having scenes where, two actors would kiss, like two South Asian actors would kiss in movies. And I remember it was the hugest, like, big deal when they had movies starting to have celebrities, like South Asian celebrities in Bollywood movies kissing. Like, I remember it was such a big deal, when Hrithik Roshan and I think it was Aishwarya Rai that kissed in that, I think it was Doom 2 or Doom 3. I don't remember which movie it was, but it was just a big freaking deal. And then Shah Rukh Khan, he did it in his movies. He started doing it more and more. So now that there's that like genuine kind of normalization of kissing, and other movies, not with well-known actors, but I've seen movies with, I guess, sort of semi-sex scenes that are kind of coming about now, and now it's progressed, but not to the point where you see it in, like, I think, Hollywood, per se. But there is a fast-forward thinking that's going on, and that's a good change. Just so parents in this generation and going forward do see that actively being represented. I think it's really important. So I'm glad that it's becoming normalized. But it has to start from the house. It has to start from conversations with your parents. It has to start with conversations with your kids. Even in conversation with your friends might not want to talk about it because they think it's, they don't want to talk about it because they think it's bad or, a taboo, so they won't talk to you about it. But if you openly have a conversation with them about it, maybe they want to open up and talk to you about it, and have that safe kind of haven to talk to you about it, and then maybe essentially learn to bring it up in front of their parents over time, kind of thing. And I want to touch on affection for the matter. I do identify as a lesbian, a South Asian queer woman, and me and my mom got into a couple of arguments where she would compare the love for me to, per se, kind of leveling it with the love that I have for my girlfriend. Obviously, that's completely different in two polarities, but because she doesn't think of me being gay, she doesn't want to think of me being gay, she kind of questions, how can you love somebody that much over your parents, kind of thing. And I think that has to do with them not wanting to think of me being, I guess, intimate in any way with my girlfriend. They think of me as just friends with her. And I think that has a lot to do with, again, normalizing intimacy. It's always an issue trying to get your parents to think you're intimate with your partner, whether you're heterosexual or homosexual, or if you identify as however you identify yourself as. But I think in South Asian culture, there is such a hardship in terms of trying to get them to understand intimacy. And so when you've got a level of, in my level, of where you're being intimate with another same gender as yourself, it's hard to get your parents to understand that intimacy, and even bring up the word, sex, for that matter, in that kind of case. So I think bringing it up in small doses is really important. And so, yeah, she would compare, the love that she has for her children, and compare it to how can you replace it with the love for somebody else, essentially. And, that has a lot to do with kind of, again, citing and then separating that from, the importance of detaching yourself from your parents that way. I guess they always think of us as, their babies, which is fine, but there has to be a way to separate us from knowing that we're adults and that we make our decisions and that we are sexually active beings. We're sexual beings that need to feel love, not just emotionally and, through parents' love, but from, our intimate partners that we have a relationship with. And back to my other example of what happened to me when I was not so much sexually assaulted, but I brought it up in my other episode where this guy was being really sexually inappropriate with me, and I didn't tell my girlfriend the same day it happened, but it was because I was internalizing the shame. For so many years I thought, sex wasn't supposed to be talked about when I was a kid, obviously, but, even though I'm, intimate, I still associate things like that happening to me as shameful, and I don't want to talk about it because I thought I've done something wrong. This happened because I shouldn't have been doing this, or things like that. So I feel like we also associate, parents tend to associate sex and shame together. So when things like this happen, it's like shameful and you don't want to talk about it, which in a large part is wrong, just because it does affect you, like I said in my previous episode, mentally and psychologically, and it does affect your relationships in turn. And again, if we stray away and we start unlearning what we've learned as children that have been causing us to be feeling so oppressed and situated in such an isolated form, I think it'd make it easier for us to do things like tell our intimate partners or tell our boyfriends, girlfriends that, this happened. You didn't do anything wrong, and there's nothing wrong with, talking about something that wasn't your fault. I think it's really important in terms of expressing, the safer parts, meaning it's important to talk about the times where you don't feel safe in sex, where you feel like you're pressured. And so sex in general should be brought up in conversation more so than it actually is these days. And some ways you can start is by just having a conversation with your parents, whether it's small, whether it's semi-serious, but it has to start somewhere. If you don't know where to start, you can, if you haven't told them that you're dating, that's probably one thing you can start off with. I think a lot of kids don't like to talk about them having boyfriends and girlfriends because they're scared what their parents are going to say. And obviously sex is going to come up in a conversation, but that won't be talked about because you're scared of what your parents, again, are going to say, or they're going to do, or they're going to think. They're going to kick you out for having even thoughts about sex. So yeah, I really think it's important to say the word vagina. We all have vaginas if you're a girl. We all have penises if you're a guy. We all have intercourse eventually, one day or another. And it's okay to have and touch and feel these body parts and feel sexually active and feel, sexually free. I think that's really important, and that's the kind of mindset that you should go forward with. Um, in obviously small doses if your parents are not accepting to it, but I feel like you shouldn't deprive yourself. And it should be definitely a conversation you bring up with your parents. Just because if we don't start now, we'll never start. And I'm doing my part in trying to help my mom understand that yes, I'm intimate with my partner, and it was such a big deal when the first time she met my girlfriend, that I even gave her a hug. She thought of it as something bad because I was hugging my girlfriend. She thought of it, obviously, she wouldn't think of her as my girlfriend, but, she's like, why are you showing so much affection towards this person? She's just your friend. And I'm like, well, no, she's not just my friend. She's my girlfriend. And I would love to hug her and hold her hand, kiss her on the cheek without having to feel like it's a fucking crime, really. And I think that can only be, it can only make a difference if you start talking about it and normalizing it yourself, within yourself, and be able to talk to your parents about it. Again, the episode or this topic isn't just about, like I said, in my experience of being a South Asian queer woman, it has to do with conversation about sex, whether you are straight or you're gay or you're bi or whatever you are, however you identify yourself with. We as South Asians need to start talking about this. It's important. It needs to be done. And the more it starts, the more it's normalized, the more it'll, I guess, become less of a taboo and more normal for us. I think it's important. And we as South Asians, need to represent ourselves as, sexual beings because we are part of that. We are humans. Just because we're brown or we're Indian or, doesn't mean we should be deprived of feeling all those things that a human being should feel. So that is my conversation to you today. Please leave any comments, questions you may have. Thank you again for listening or tuning in, however you guys are, from whichever platform. I'm your host, Sunny N, and you're listening to Come Out and Shout. Thanks, guys.